Following on from his conversation with me about his new novel, Queen Julius Caesar, I have the pleasure of being joined by author Martin Campbell again today. I want to ask him about his first novel, The Love God. Martin, thank you for talking to me again today. Do you feel comfortable talking about your novel, The Love God, now that it has been in print for 6 years?
Yes, it's nice to talk about it really. I mean, it's sold quite a few copies, I've had lots of reviews, but perhaps stupidly, we've never actually done an interview about it, so it's nice to actually give it some airtime.
So tell me a bit about yourself 6 years ago. What motivated you at the time to write such an ambitious first novel?
Well, I'd found out about Antinous. I've been to Rome, I've been to Greece. I'd started to do some research for the novel because I thought it was such an interesting subject. But I was a senior manager in the NHS. It was difficult to find the time really to write a book. And then I fell very ill. I had a brain hemorrhage and had to retire from work. I was off work for about a year and a half before I had to retire. And suddenly, therefore, I had time and I could dedicate that time to doing something useful to develop my brain, which was damaged after the hemorrhage. And all the clinicians and nurses and so on encouraged that. And that's what happened. I spent a year writing the novel, and it really helped me to rebuild things like numbers, which were quite damaged after the brain hemorrhage. I struggled to do basic sums and arithmetic, and I had to do it. You're talking a historical novel with places, distances, times, dates, so it really helped.
And why did you choose Eros as your narrator and not yourself?
The very, very first thing I wrote, the very first words were "tell me about love," and I had a vague notion that would be the narrator speaking. And I started to sort of play around with, did I want to be the narrator or not? It suddenly dawned on me there are gods of love and goddesses of love. So why not use their voice? And it meant that they could be slightly stepped back from the story and slightly stepped back from me. So they could give a bit of an independent view and they could comment on things which really as a narrator purely within a novel you can't. So it gave me a real opportunity to actually make comments on how we perceive love and how we perceive ancient figures in love. I think that gave it an extra angle, and the feedback I've had over the last 6 years have been that people have really enjoyed that aspect of the novel.
The Love God is about a Greek youth, Antinous, who becomes an emperor's lover and then a god. Did he actually exist? And if so, what can you tell us about him?
Yes, he definitely existed. He was a Greek youth. He was living in what is now Turkey, but was then part of Greece and subsequently part of Rome, the Roman Empire. And that's at the point at which Antinous grows up. We know very, very little about his past, in fact, virtually nothing about his past. Hadrian meets him aged 14 in Greece, falls in love with a beautiful youth, brings him to Rome, and they then start a relationship which becomes one of the most significant ancient love stories in history. He seems to have been quite athletic, quite sporty. He accompanied Hadrian on hunts, and ultimately, when he died tragically in the Nile, drowning in the Nile, Hadrian was so grief-stricken that he created a city for him on the bend of the Nile where Antinous died. He named a star for Antinous. He created a city on the banks of the Nile where Antinous died, and he created hundreds of images of Antinous, meaning that Antinous is the most regularly seen face from the ancient world. There are far more images of him surviving than Julius Caesar or Cleopatra or other figures that you might imagine would have lots and lots and lots of images of them. They really don't. Antinous has far more than any other ancient human being. So it's actually very significant historically, and yet very few people know about him.
Obviously, Roman Emperor Hadrian also features significantly throughout the novel. What sort of character do you think he had?
There's a lot written about him. Some of it is fairly conflicting. Some of it paints him as semi-tyrannical, certainly towards the end of his reign. Um, what we do know about him as a person was that he really was worshipped by the military. The soldiers loved him, and they loved him because he actually fought alongside them. He actually marched with them on the long marches to battles. He ate with them, spoke with them, ensured they were well fed and well paid. So that was a significant aspect of Hadrian. He was quite a macho man, and but that doesn't detract from the fact that a macho man can be gay, and it challenges that assumption that so many people have that gay people always are effeminate. I don't think Hadrian was effeminate at all. He was a lover of the art and a lover of architecture. He pretty much rebuilt ancient Greece, which was in ruins when he found it. He created some of the greatest temples of the ancient world. And he created his own villa in the town which is now called Tivoli near Rome in Italy, which is one of the most magnificent sets of architecture of the ancient world. So he was quite a diverse man in his interests. But ultimately, I think he was also someone who was loving. I think he appreciated initially the beauty of Antinous, but then clearly absolutely fell in love with him. And there's nothing more clear from the ancient world of a love affair when someone names a star, builds a city, creates hundreds of images. That's love in its purest sense, and that was Hadrian.
And would you describe Hadrian as gay?
Well, this has always been a controversy. And as I said in our previous interview, the word gay, when applied to ancient history, is controversial because the word didn't exist. The word is maybe 150 years old as applied to the gay community. But when the Hadrian Empire and Conflicts exhibition was put together at the British Museum in 2009-10, I think it was, the curator of the museum for the first time made the statement, "We can now say that Hadrian was gay." And that's very significant for one of the great museums of the world, because up till that point, nobody had ever said that about Hadrian. So yes, I think the word gay does apply. There were ancient words that were similar. There was senadus, there was katamai. There are other words that were applied in their own language, which meant pretty much the same thing. So all effectively we are doing is translating that kind of colloquialism into our modern colloquial phrase, and I think that works.
The Love God describes Hadrian's wife Sabina as a lesbian. Was that your imagination, or is there some truth to the story?
It's a difficult one to piece together. Ancient writers clearly hint at it, and they always describe her travelling with Julia Balbilla, who was a poet and was a daughter of a poet, and the inference is always there that the relationship between Hadrian and Sabina was a marriage of convenience, and that they had their own love affairs, and the implication with Sabina is that she had love affairs with women. And certainly Sabina travelled with the royal family wherever they went. At the point where Antinous died, she is there alongside Sabina. So I don't think it's a huge step to say that she was lesbian. She was probably bisexual. She clearly was married to Hadrian, although that may not have been particularly her own choice. But it made her incredibly rich. She was the most powerful woman in the ancient world by default, having married Hadrian. So there are lots of benefits, but I think she probably was, on the balance of things, I think she probably was lesbian.
When we talked about your novel, Queen Julius Caesar, you told me that you're writing a series of novels about lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender peoples through history. Who are you writing about now?
So I'm writing about quite a challenging one, who is the Roman Emperor Elagabalus. He's one of the later emperors of Rome, and is seen as a very controversial figure in that he is written about in terms that we would currently describe as probably gender non-specific, possibly transgender, and that makes him a very controversial figure for early writers, because the writers were around the early stages of Christianity when Christianity is adopted in Rome as the state religion. So they're writing with that audience in mind, and they're having to look at this strange emperor who did wear female clothing, who did marry a man who is meant to have been a phallus worshipper. He certainly was the priest of an ancient cult of a god called Elegabal, god stroke goddess, because it's a gender non-specific deity as well. So there's lots of challenges for later Rome and early Christianity and how to describe that. And therefore all you get about Elagabalus is negative, negative, negative. And what I'm trying to tease apart is who was this young man. He became emperor at 14, he ruled for 4 years and was then assassinated. What was his life like? What was his life like before? And my concept of Elagabalus is that he was very challenged by his position, that he was very religious. He was aiming, or was going to be created, the high priest of Elagabal. When you get ripped out of that and suddenly told you are emperor, what do you do at age 14? You're still a teenager, you still want to explore yourself, your life. And that's, I think, what he did. He had the treasury of Rome at his fingertips. He could do whatever he liked. As a 14-year-old, wouldn't you?
So is that easy to research? Again, his name is not a familiar one to me.
Yeah, it's a little bit like Antinous. It's hardly written about. People don't really know how to write about him, I think, particularly from an academic historical perspective, because what an academic person would write about is purely what's there in the ancient texts, and what's there in the ancient text is pretty awful. So to write about an emperor who only ruled for 4 years, I think a lot of historians kind of shy away from it and don't quite want to grasp it. I've only found one serious, detailed academic examination of Caballas, which is the basis of my research, really. And that is based on a lot of the ancient texts itself. So it isn't easy, but you can look at the wider context of what's happening in the Roman Empire at the time. You can look at the faith aspects. You can look at how people interacted with people who were not specifically heterosexual in classic terms. And it starts then to become quite an interesting picture. And I think I'm going to write quite an interesting novel about it, I hope.
Will a god or goddess be narrating that novel for you as well?
Yes, I had to really think about that. And in the end, I chose to go with Hermaphrodite. Hermaphrodite is a deity who is both male and female, and not by choice. They were two individuals originally, a semi-deity and a human. The semi-deity fell in love with Hermaphrodite, who was a male, and a goddess joined them together, so that she would never be without him. He didn't have much of a choice in it, frankly. So you suddenly got this strange melded together duo, or single person. And that gave me the opportunity to think, okay, I can write someone, a narrator, who can see both female and male aspects of Elagabalus, and I thought that was quite interesting. And I'm still struggling with that. I'm still writing that and trying to figure out how to do it, because you have the whole issue these days of pronouns. And do I describe Elagabalus as he, because he was a boy, or describe them as they, because she was experimenting with their gender and sexuality at the same time? And do I do the same for Hermaphrodite? So it's an interesting challenge, and I'm still not entirely sure how I'm going to work that. So bear with me, and hopefully we'll see it in a few years' time.
Do you feel that you have established a style or formula that you will follow for all future novels?
I think so. Yeah, I think having the deity as narrator is useful. It's a vehicle to allow you to explore issues that are being described in the novel in a way that you couldn't do if there was just a straight narration of the story. So I think I'll keep that aspect of it. I do like writing about the places and the ambience of the places that people are visiting in the story. I like to research things like what would they have eaten, how did they cut their hair, all those little detail things that often are glossed over in historical novels because the writer doesn't necessarily want to go into the research to get that detail. But that's the sort of thing that gets me going. I love it. So I think that's what people find interesting about my novels is the feedback I've been having, that you not only get the story, but you get a real sense of this is what it was like around them. This is what it looked like, smelled like, felt like. For me, as a historical writer, that I think is really appealing, and I love it.
So you've written about a historical gay romance, historical bisexual relationships, and you're writing about a historical transgender Roman emperor. Will you be writing about a historical lesbian figure?
That's my plan. I still haven't definitely decided where to go with that. The most obvious one, the sort of cliched one, is the poet Sappho. She is reputed to have written love poems to a female. There's always debate about that in academic circles. I think that's pretty true, so I could go with her. And I could go with stories about the goddesses. You have Callisto and Artemis, you have Minerva. There are various goddesses that are either completely asexual, bisexual, probably lesbian. So I could play around with some of those. So I haven't arrived at the one I'm going to write about, but I do definitely intend to do a lesbian novel.
And I gather you have a few days of publicity coming up this week. Can you tell us about that, please?
Yeah, it's exciting. Publish Nation, who I've published the book through, they are going to do a few days of specific publicity about my novel, Queen Julius Caesar, and they've had quite a few people, I gather, read the book, review the book, and that's all going to be put on over the next few days onto Amazon and various other book promotion websites. And I'm putting this video and the video of my previous interview about Queen Julius Caesar online for all to see as well. And they're then going to do press releases and other promotion to try and get a debate and talk about the book. This book has already been very controversial with some academics and historians, so hopefully that will get quite an interesting debate going. So fingers crossed.
Thank you so much, and I wish you every success with all your novels, past, present, and future.
Thank you so much.